Good morning. Today is April the, this is another one of those where I don't know the date exactly. I'm going to say the 7th. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, and I'm embarrassed after the fact, but it is what it is. Anyway, we are out today. We're in the area northeast of the local vigilance area, part of the greater local vigilance area, and we are here to follow through on some infrasound recording and assorted things today. We are going to look for tracks, although the leaf litter is more the predominance today. It's been warm, kind of like that weird time of year in southern New England where one day is warm, you start jonesing for summer, and then the next day reminds you winter's not completely gone yet. So we're kind of like in a halfway time between that. Next week I am, if weather behaves itself, heading north into Vermont or New Hampshire to kind of get back into that area as we're serenaded by, I think, a red-tailed hawk. We're going to cover a couple of things today. We're going to have a look around and do some passive recording. I did bring the drone for the first time in a while, but it is windy as windy can be up here, so I don't know, and the red-tailed hawk is kind of a concern for drone safety too. I actually have had one go after it in the past. So we'll bear those things in mind. We're going to get moving and let's see what we find. Okay, we're back, and unlike last week, we have our gimbal camera. We're more organized, and I have no excuses for that other than the fact that I just spaced on that and basically, like a numbnuts, left the house without it. My other camera was uncharged, so I was basically stuck with a camera that was set to the lowest possible resolution and gave a, there go two kind of ducks. I'm going to guess mallard. As it gets warmer, you're going to see more wildlife out. Oh, there's two more over there. And yeah, I'd say they are mallards. I'll hang back so I don't disturb them for a minute. So today we're going to cover a few things. Interesting question raised by the Tall Ones podcast. I tend to pay a little attention to that, but also looks like he's moved on from the Mark Zaske debate that he had going on. Again, I don't know Mark Zaske from a hole in the wall, but I do think that his way of handling criticism was telling. The big one for the week, I'm going to take a look at the beaver dam over there too, because I don't know if I'm getting that. Let me walk over this way. There are fresh limbs on there. So I've never seen the beaver in here, but clearly there are signs of life. And so that would suggest that there is a beaver or two in here. But the same is true of the areas I go to in Vermont, where they're basically beaver ponds. And I think I've seen a beaver twice in the years I've been going there. Where I've actually, believe it or not, I've had potential Bigfoot sightings more times up there than I've had beaver sightings, as messed up as that is. Anyway, the big one this week is Steve Kulls versus Thinker Thunker. And basically, this is like a petty feud between two people that are well known around the Bigfoot YouTube community. But it also calls into question an issue with the YouTube platform itself, because I've seen other people outside of the Bigfooting world try to do what happened this week, and it is a situation that basically is allowable by way, I don't know if those are, we don't have loons down here, do we? They're too far off to really see what they are, but I'll hang back and see what they are. There's a couple of, they look like they're ducks though. Anyway, I digress. So the issue I speak of is the threat of taking down, the threat of either having somebody take down a critical opinion about the other person's content, or they're going to have them and their followers brigade, which means if to those that are not so savvy with the terminology, mass complain about, and here's more beaver sign right there, little chewing pattern there. Mass complain about the bullying, so to speak, and as a result of that, the YouTube algorithmic dynamic kicks in, and they'll get a copyright strike or similar to their channel, and if you get 3 strikes, you're out and it kills the channel, basically making your critic go away and the like of that. And the fact of that is, the thing that makes that so underhanded is basically it's weaponizing a platform's protocol as a form of intimidation or censorship when somebody is trying to point out criticism towards the information you're putting out there. The thing is with Steve Kulls, I think this is where Thinker Thunker might have taken a step too far, because Steve is not going to step. I know Steve personally. We've been friends for years, and he's not going to take a step back and take that lightly. He's going to probably double down and come back at you. And he's been doing the he's been doing the hoax busting thing for years, and he's not going to stop now. And if you are making a big enough ass of yourself to draw fire from him, there's typically a reason why. And so I got curious enough to go and briefly look at some of the most recent stuff that Thinker Thunker's putting out there, and I'm going to make 2 statements. One, it's kind of painful. It's kind of like, come on, dude, really? Seriously? Secondly, it's like Minnesota Iceman bad. Somewhere out there was somebody who was like just clinging to the truth behind the Minnesota Iceman, which is folkloric at best, in my opinion anyway. But should Mr. Thunker, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say that's probably not his real name, get wind of my criticism that I'm going to give, although I'm not going to dwell on it that much, because I would rather be out here doing this than going after every 2-bit person making questionable content on YouTube. If I did, that's really all I would be doing. And, you know, there are others like Steve that are doing that, so I don't really need to. Where'd all the ducks go? They're way the hell over on the other side, whatever they are. I'm rethinking the non-launching of the drone now towards, I'm going to keep it at a lower pace. My concern with that basically being it is windy. They said the winds today were going to be between 9 and 15 miles an hour, and that's not really that much for a DJI Spark, which is basically, in that kind of wind, a little brick that doesn't get buffeted that much. The problem is if you go too high, what you have in the way of wind at, say, 75 feet is not necessarily what you have at 200 feet. And since you can legally go up 400, I have been mugged by wind at higher altitudes before, whereupon you basically see your drone heading towards the Massachusetts state border, whether you like it or not, at speeds higher than you were intended to go. So I will potentially, you got something digging down there. No, I want you to zoom. That. And could be anything. But back to Mr. Thunker, he has some, what was the premise of the latest one? Basically he found, or somebody found a head. It reads almost like he found a head in a head shop, as badly punned as that is. And it is mildly more defined than the horrible picture of the distorted face of a sort of kind of cavemanish looking thing in the Minnesota Iceman. Kind of like a poor man's attempt to recreate that, really. And he has basically seemingly doubled down that this is real to him. I beg to differ. I'll be diplomatic enough to say I beg to differ. And I'm not going to go all the way through his channel because I, no offense to him, have better things to do. But if in fact that offends him. It's the one time I'm going to give you any kind of criticism, so you can get over it. And we can take things from there, but I don't have any intention of communicating with him either, so it doesn't really matter. The thing I'll say, though, is that if he pulls this little maneuver with me about trying to get my channel flagged for, number one, as I've said to other things, it is thoroughly non-monetized. So right there, the one thing that worries the YouTube police is like what their sponsors do. And since I don't have any, I think that kind of like insulates me a little bit. Number two, I'm not exactly the biggest channel out there. There are those that know of me, there are those that don't. That's okay, because I don't do this for the sake of having a bazillion subscribers, because I'm never going to hit that point where you feel like you have to create content to make your subscribers happy. I do the stuff that makes me happy, and if you like it, you'll watch it, and if you don't, you don't. That is how my channel works. I also do not apologize for having the opinion that may not sit well with others, and the channel that has threatened the Squatch Detective channel is one that comes across a bit, how shall we say, tabloidish. No offense, but call it as I see it, number one. Number two, if you're going to go down this road of continually like threatening to censor people by way of weaponizing the algorithm, I've never been in a conflict like this myself because I don't really go out of my way looking for trouble. But I will say that if you attempt the copyright strike, the way I understand it is it either works against you or for you. It's a double-edged sword. So if you don't succeed in getting a copyright strike against the other channel, I think there's a good chance your channel takes the hit. Which is what I mean by saying this is a double-edged sword for Mr. Thunker. If you take a shot at Steve's channel and you fail, you get the strike. And again, you get 3, and then you get shot down. And even if you don't, Steve has a loyal following and a large following. And as easily as you and yours can brigade him, him and his can do the same to you. That's the other application of the double-edged sword analogy. It can happen just as easily to you as it does to him, so you proceed on that. You proceed down that warpath with that caution that you can do it to them, but there's nothing keeping others from doing it to you. And once you have a reputation for doing it, there's going to come a point that you yourself have a bullseye because others out there aren't going to put up with your shit. I'm not going to participate in anything like that if I'm not attacked, but you get me to a 2 or 3 strike model. Pepperidge Farms remembers. Take that with a grain of salt for good or bad. The other thing off the top of my head, future plans. I think I mentioned last week the plans to begin in the northern part of areas in Vermont. Plans change, and mine have. So we're going to begin a little bit more traditionally, at least next week. We'll see what we find up there. And it may be you still have snowpack up there. Those conditions vary wildly this time of year, so the first ride up there is usually kind of a roll of the dice. I've gone up a couple of times in late March, and you still had 2 and 3 feet of snow on the ground, and you couldn't get in anywhere, which is irritating because it limits what you can do up there. And gas not being any cheaper in the state of Connecticut lately. Separate rant, not going to go into that now. The tall ones asked the question this week, though, does Bigfoot use fire? I'm going to say no. Based on my own observations of direct contact with what I believe to be the creature, at least the variety that you have common to the Northeast. It is more than an animal. It is not a type of relic human. It is something unique, in my opinion, somewhere in between. But I have not seen any signs of it using fire. And for all the woo folk out there, they're going to say forest people, forest people. No offense, but F you, prove it. You make claims, back them up. Same as Thinker Thunker's head shop head, as I'm now going to refer to it. So today, as far as tracking and other things, we have this lovely early April matted down leaf litter crap that is really, really bad for tracking. And so we are kind of stuck looking for any obvious dents in muddy areas, or we are looking for poo samples or other things. It's kind of like up in Vermont, it's probably going to be muddier, so you'll have more tracking possibilities there. There's a big funky tree. That makes this part of the woods interesting because you have a lot of that. Now you see when I have the camera I have now, I can show you stuff like that because this one has pan and gimbal kind of movements. So you can kind of on the fly show you something. Kind of like a video microphone. But yeah, so no, I don't think Bigfoot uses fire. Then again, you have other people. What are some of the other interesting notions I've been confronted with over the years? I had a guy in one of my channels, or one of my Facebook groups a while back, that was adamant that Bigfoot was an alien because he hides in the woods. And I'll be damned if I could really wrap my mind around the guy's logic to that, but whatever. I did find he was an amusing fellow, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I found him to be kind of entertaining. Eventually, though, he did go the route of, like other people that are in the minority view in a group, and they get hostile and start to get overly aggressive in their approach of trying to make people see things their way. And I had to remove him. He wasn't a Vermont native, so it you know, executive decision. If he ever wanted to, I didn't ban him, I just removed him. So if he ever wanted to come back and play nice, so to speak. Another weird ass tree. I forgot that. I think that got that adequately. What else? I mean, then you have all the lovely, like, mind speak, and the term for mind speak is actually telepathy, or ESP, but you guys want to use rednecky sounding stupid things, but whatever, knock yourselves out. And portals and the cloaking shit. And again, if you want to prove this, you know, you make crazy claims, you got to show crazy evidence to have people like me buy into your nonsense. But you know, you are entertaining, knock yourselves out. I am going to focus for a little bit on tracking and signs of activity in here, so I'm probably going to take a segment break. I covered the talking points immediately off the top of my head from the standpoint of the community, and I'm going to cover a little bit of ground and head over that way towards crossing a stream and getting into a different area and seeing what's over there for a bit. And we'll take things from there. We'll be back in a bit. We've covered a little bit of ground. We're over by one of the tribog bogs. This is more of a, I don't know, it's a weird, long, it's a large bog, but it's very casual stroll through friendly. It basically is kind of a pain to get into because there's a lot of it is just like, you know, wet, swampy, up to your knees, cold black swamp water. in the midst of tall grass that's hard to maneuver through. So it's interesting. I know of a couple of hunter spots over beyond there that are in probably the thickest of the undergrowth around it too. So I don't know if, I mean, it's not like you can gun for moose in Connecticut. There is no moose season. We have a small moose population. I'll say that much. We have a small moose population, and that is the situation with that. Among other interesting wildlife that we do actually have in the area. That is the entry to the, if the camera will behave itself, to the wetland right there. And we are going to do a crossing right here because not too bad. That was pretty simple. I'll have to remember that spot coming back as we head up in here. So getting back to the YouTube thing, just this last week, other non-Bigfoot related YouTube stuff, there was a guy who does like police audit stuff. I don't know if you're into that kind of thing. Some of that content is better than others, in my opinion. Something's been through here playing with bark. Where did that come from? That could be any one of a number of things too, but points to larger wildlife. God forbid, given the time of year, I would come across like some moose shed or something, although it'd be a bitch to get it out of here given the size it could potentially be. It'd be a cool find though. But this one guy was kind of criticizing another guy, and he shows some of the content the guy has, and I actually am somewhat okay, that's what that was. Never ceases to amaze me the amount of weird sounds you'll hear that are just a tree scraping against another one. It was one of those moments like with the pulsating thing I had a couple of months, like I want to say like 2 or 3 months ago, where I was like, what in the hell is that? That was a tree scraping. The pulsing sound was definitely not a tree scraping. That was infrasound something. To the people that like stick structure stuff, if the camera will stop being a little poop. There you go, there's something for you. Now, before you start screaming Bigfoot, unfortunately there is a hunter site over there. There's a little hunter corral over there. There is a tree stand over there. And when you do have deer season, there's quite a few people that come out here and take their luck trying to snag Bambi. Presumably you could have turkey hunters out here too, but the $30-something turkey and pheasant tag is kind of an irritation of mine. Typical of the nutmeg state, they make hunting a pain in the ass otherwise. Because just last week I renewed my fishing license, but I did not renew, or I didn't take the course because I'm on the waiting list for the course. But given the timing and some choices on my end, I ended up I'd be coming into the spring turkey season late. So if I have to wait till fall, that's okay. Because I'm good to proceed up north. When I get to Vermont, I will be partially in hunting mode as well. And that's probably going to be a difference in my approach this year versus past years, as I'm going to enter into the woods with kind of a multiple agenda. And I will be hunting tom turkey. I don't think Vermont has a spring grouse season, so I put a couple of extra bucks into their turkey tag, and I have the possibility of getting Thanksgiving dinner early, like a May Thanksgiving dinner. I think I'm allowed 2. The license itself has 2 tags, and then I would have to do my homework. You may have to just go out and buy more tags, or maybe they limit you to 2. I don't know. I stand corrected. The other hunting spot is right there. I was a little bit off in that, but that's why it's hard to get lost in this stretch of woods, because there are like certain landmarks I have in here that I know, and they've been here. So I mean, that one, the funny thing about that hunting spot, I hope I'm not outing these guys, they have a porta potty over there, so they spend a decent amount of time out here. I think that they got like the bucket with the toilet lid on. I find that very funny. I find that very, very, very amusing. Anyway, getting back to the parallel analogy on YouTube. So this guy was criticized by another guy, same thing as Thinker Thunker and Culls. Only this time we're talking about the wonderful world of police auditing, which, if you're not familiar with, is people going around and filming police activity around their area, grilling them on their knowledge of the law, First, Fourth, Fifth Amendment stuff, to various degrees of obnoxiousness. Some guys do an analogy post facto of things like Audit the Audit is one guy who does that, and his stuff is top notch because he doesn't like brazenly troll the police. He doesn't come at this from a standpoint of the police suck. He basically does an honest rating of how each side in the interaction handled themselves, and a lot of the times one side will get a B-, the other one gets a C, and it's like, he could have done this better, the other guy could have done this better. Basically, they didn't do anything overly horrible, but... And then you have the ones that are wandering around and straight up trolling the police like this guy was. And I've seen 2 of his videos, and Jesus Christ, is he obnoxious. I'm actually amazed he has not gotten arrested multiple times, because he is that much of a friggin' nuisance. I'm not going to name his name and get him on my case, but he is... His content is annoying. It is very annoying. And he's like the polar opposite end of that spectrum. And he actually threatened the guy who criticized him the same exact way that Thunker did to Steve. And they, the guy basically, neither case did the threat work. Basically, Thunker basically had Steve come on and do a breakdown of why it's not going to work. And this guy, the guy's, I forget what the critic's name was, but he was somebody who apparently has a little bit of a following. And he basically, same thing. It's like, no, you want to try and take down my channel, knock yourself out, because you don't know how the system works. And if you, again, try to strike a channel and you fail, there's a good chance you and your channel take the strike instead. And you only get 3. And this will happen, because a friend of mine had a channel, wasn't taken down due to copyright strike that I'm aware of, but he had 3 channels. He had one on Bigfoot, he had one on archery, because he was into that. We had 2 common interests, archery and the Bigfoot thing, and then he was a bit of a, shall we say, Second Amendment enthusiast. And something that he put on his channel with that triggered the algorithm, and suddenly one day all 3 of his channels were wiped out. No explanation. So these things do happen. I know a few people got nervous in the Bigfoot space when YouTube and others were starting to get all policing of, like, quote-unquote fake news, and let's face it, Bigfoot is considered a fringe subject like UFOs and a bunch of other stuff, and I would make the argument that there's a number of ways to interpret the various content. There are people out there that are posting nonsense. And I could name them, but there's too many to name. And then there are those that are pursuing this like from a folklore. I mean, you have some people that go out there and just read off encounter stories, and that's like just reinforcing the folklore, which is, it's not what I do, but there's nothing wrong with it. It's what a lot of people like about the subject. They like to hear about the stories. And I understand that. I'm trying to figure out how far I'm going to go into this today. I mean, the thing is, again, you're dealing with this flat leaf litter stuff, and it really is bogus for finding tracks and the like. And like I said, this area's been quiet this year, so I'm going to have to just contend with that. Next week, I'll have higher hopes because I'm going back into an area. And if I can get into the area I want, we are going to hopefully have better luck. The thing about the area I'm heading to, there's a plan A and there's a plan B. The plan B site, I know I will be able to get into, and there's an area there last year, at the very end of the season, I did not get back into. It was just starting to begin to snow, and I had like maybe one or two more chances to get in there. So I do not like unfinished business, ladies and gentlemen, and that is where we will pick up if I can't get into the other area. I will be revisiting that area anyway. That's going to happen. Anywho, so this guy basically tried to do the intimidation thing, threatening to strike his channel, and the other guy just said, bring it on. And a day later, he's making some bogus claim. Well, this actually helped expand my channel, so all I can do is say thank you. And, you know, he came right out and said, I don't have the goods to strike his channel. Like, yeah, no kidding. But you look like a dick either way. But whatever. I'm not going to name his name because this guy is such an obnoxious piece of work. I want nothing to do with him. I don't deal with the police audit space. I mean, like I said, some people do it with a relative impartiality, and other people are out there basically just trying to provoke the police. And I think this guy is such an extreme example of it that basically, if he hasn't been arrested, it's probably because the police don't take him seriously. Which is funny in its own right. Well, we're going to do yet another segment break. I am going to either head that way or sort of back the way I came and do a loop through the area and see where we go with this. If, for some reason, I cannot get to Vermont next week for whatever reason, I'll come back here, and what we're going to do is something more reminiscent of warmer weather, where I'm going to do a hard overland right into there and come all the way out the other side and go through and do a longer version of a hike through all of this. Today I kind of have more of a multi-tiered agenda, so we're going to do that instead. But next week we will do that. If I don't get to Vermont, we'll get here. Or, God forbid, we can do like a double-day weekend, which I've done before, and come here the next day after Vermont and get a whole bunch of stuff going through there and doing that too. In fact, I may just do that now. In the meantime, we're going to take a break. There's another little stick structure over there to end this off with. If, again, you're in... Hold on. Little poop. And I'm not saying it is anything because there's a lot of like wind that comes through this area, and a lot of this unfortunately is naturally occurring, even though some people would say otherwise. But until you can show me a picture of a monkey person basically tearing down trees and making stick art, unfortunately I don't buy into that unless you got something really exceptionally weird. And what would I consider that? You have an example. These are the ones in Alaska where you have people posting pictures of like freaking big trees that were like ripped up and put in upside down. That didn't happen naturally. That happened with some help. So there's a story behind that. Stuff like that is interesting. Stuff like this happens all the time, and you want to think there are those out there in the immediate neighborhood that would like you to believe that it's like Bigfoot because they're basically pushing their conference or whatever. And unfortunately, the flaws of the community are, let's review them again. A, hoaxers. B, bullshitters that are basically selling nonsense. you know who you are, because I mentioned you today as an example, and others as well. And then you have the exploiters, the hucksters, the podcasters, and not all podcasters, but some, as well as some of the YouTubers and conference goers. So having said that, I'm going to stop ranting now. I'm going to take a segment break, and we'll be back in a little bit.